Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay. Donald Trump has selected Mike Pompeo as his choice for the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Pompeo is a member of the Tea Party. He's been a U.S. representative for Kansas 4th District since 2011. Became a known figure on the national stage due to his involvement in the Benghazi hearings, where he questioned Hillary Clinton on, among other things, where the CIA was running guns out of Libya into Syria. Pompeo once told the virulent anti-Muslim Islamophobe Frank Gaffney during a radio show that he thought Obama may have a, quote, affinity for radical Islam. He's also a strong supporter of NSA bulk data collection that was most recently exposed by former NSA contractor Edward Snowden. And he's been openly hostile to the Iran nuclear deal. That seems to be a thread running throughout all of President Trump's appointments so far. Pompeo supports a ban on all abortions except when a mother's health is at risk. He opposed a closing of Guantanamo, and he has very much backed by the NRA. Thanks. And now joining us to discuss a little more about Mr. Pompeo is Mr. McGovern. Ray McGovern leads the Speaking Truth to Power section of Tell the World, the publishing arm of the Ecumenical Church of the Savior in inner city Washington. He's a retired CIA officer and was employed to help the morning briefings of presidents over 27 years, including Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Thanks for joining us, Ray.
Welcome.
So what do you make of the guy who's now the boss of your former employer?
Well, you missed one. It was a gory enough list that you had used, Paul, but you missed he's a big fan of torture. In other words, if there were any doubt that Trump was talking reality and not just appealing to the basest instincts of the American people for vengeance, it's now dispelled by the fact that he's picked as his CIA director an aficionado of torture. He visited Guantanamo. He thought it was great. He said, you know, as far as I could see, those prisoners are gaining weight. So that's what we're faced with here. A fellow who's going to turn back the clock. And, you know, if Obama had the strength of his convictions and didn't decide just to look forward and not look backwards, he would have gotten rid of the torturers in the CIA. He let them stay, and now they're having a celebration with the notion that their new director will be a fan of torture.
When it came to the lead up in the time before 9/11, we're told, George Tenet says in his book, and it's been reported, the very first thing he said to George Bush in the first national security briefing was that the #1 threat to the United States was al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. We know from lots of evidence since, including Richard Clarke's book, who was the anti-terrorism czar who'd been appointed by Clinton and demoted by Bush and Cheney, that when any intelligence was generated about 9/11 that led to perhaps involving and implicating the Saudis and implicating some of the actual conspiracy, that the response from Dick Cheney was, if it's not Iraqi-sponsored, I don't want to hear about it. And we're going to do a lot more on that story soon. George Tenet, also was one who said he had his hair on fire about al-Qaeda and so on and so on. But when the pressure came, and Cheney pressured and wanted Tenet to come up with intelligence that would justify the invasion of Iraq, even though everybody knew Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11, and they tried to connect Saddam to 9/11. Tenet acquiesced. Tenet played ball, and he helped generate the intelligence. What do we know about Pompeo? If, and I'm imagining here, but I don't think it's unfounded imaginings, if a Vice President Pence, who already says he wants to model his vice presidency after Dick Cheney, if he goes to a Pompeo and wants to start generating some evidence how Iran is violating the nuclear agreement, or how Iran is building a bomb, or how Iran is planning a terrorist attack on the United States, do we think Pompeo would stand up to that or play ball? And I know I'm asking you to speculate here.
Well, I think he'll play ball. The question is whether the professionals who worked where I did in the analysis part of the agency will go along with it. There's lots of evidence that there's been great resistance, for example, to blame Bashar al-Assad for the sarin attacks, the gas attacks outside Damascus on the 21st of August, 2013. Also, to blame the Russians or the pro-Russians on the downing of MH17, that aircraft, the airplane that was downed with 298 people dead. The intelligence community would not come up with an intelligence memorandum. And so our leaders had to deal with a government assessment prepared in the White House by political hacks. Now, the big thing is this, Paul. After the debacle of Iraq, where George Tenet, John McGovern, all those senior CIA leaders played ball so that it could be a war, someone got it into their head, well, Cheney and Bush are going after Iran next. My God, what are we going to do? They found an honest man to run an estimate on Iran. His name was Tom Finger. They had to go to the State Department to get him. Long story short, he brought his own specialists in. They came up, they worked all during 2007. They came up with an estimate that said Iran stopped working on a nuclear weapon at the end of 2003 and has not resumed work on that weapon. Unanimous decision expressed with high confidence. What did that do? That played a huge role in stopping Cheney and Bush's plans to do Iran in the last year of their tenure. We know that. Bush says it in his memoirs. He says, this was an eye-popping estimate. It deprived me of the military option. For how could I authorize a strike on the nuclear facilities of a country that the intelligence community says has no active nuclear weapons program? Bummer. So what I'm saying here, it depends on integrity. And I have more than just a hope. I have some evidence that there are enough realistic, enough honest analysts left in the CIA that Pompeo would have great reason to fear that were he to do the kinds of things that the cowardly Tenet and McGovern did, there would be, leaks, huh? That's the name of the game these days. It's the only way you learn out what's coming out, what's coming on. And so there may be a break on Pompeo and what he wanted to do. And if not, you're going to get lots of people speaking out saying, look, they're going after Iran again. They're making believe that Iran is working on a nuclear weapon. Mike Flynn says it, and 8 years after we did this estimate, nobody knows better than Mike Flynn that the Iranians stopped working on a nuclear weapon at the end of 2003. So why does he say they're still working on it 5 years later or 8 years later? It's that's what we're faced with here. Right. And hopefully there'll be enough honest people staying in there and fighting the good fight.
All right. Thanks very much for joining us, Ray.
You're welcome, Paul.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.